Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Halloween. All right. I thought a ghost would pop up somewhere, but that wasn't the case. Welcome back to meeting 135 as we continue our study on the five-year legislation of the Copyright Act, a statutory review of the Copyright Act. Today we have with us, as individuals, Tony Belcourt, Arts and Cultural Knowledge Keeper. Johnny, is he here? Yep. Blackfield, Johnny Blackfield, certified blockchain professional by video conferencing from North Carolina. Can you hear us, sir?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Looking forward to your presentation. We still don't know about this one, eh?
No,
okay. So we're still waiting on one more. Maybe she'll pop in. Luann Neal. She's a Kagwis artist from Victoria, British Columbia. Hopefully she'll be able to join us. And finally, from the Indigenous Culture and Media Innovations, Monique Manich, Executive Director. So you'll all have 7 minutes to present, and then we'll go into our rounds of questions back and forth. We're going to... You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable members, my name is Tony Belcourt. I'm known as an Indigenous advocate whose career includes being the founding president of the Native Council of Canada in 1971 to 74, and as founding president of the Métis Nation of Ontario in 94 to 2008. I was a member of the Board of Governors of the Métis National Council and served as the Métis Nation ambassador to the United Nations and the Organization of American States. I took part in the negotiations on the draft UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'm also a writer, producer, and director of documentary films. I'm semi-retired and am now regarded by many as a Métis elder and an Indigenous arts cultural professional. I was involved in the arts very early in my career. In 1969-70, I was vice president and managing director of Team Products, Alberta and Mackenzie. Team Products was a cooperative of over 500 Métis and First Nations artists and craftspeople from throughout Alberta and the Mackenzie Valley of the NWT. The production and sale of arts and crafts in the 60s and 70s was an essential source of income for our people. It supplemented living off the land and seasonal employment. Today, the sale of art and crafts is a mainstay of the Indigenous economy in many communities and households. According to 2011 Canadian census data, there were over 136 artists in Canada who spent more time at their art than any other occupation. 3,700 are Indigenous artists, representing about 2.7% of all the artists. Indigenous artists today are achieving great success in the art world. While until a short while ago only regarded as craft by institutions such as the National Gallery of Canada, Indigenous art can now be found in galleries throughout the world. Art, once sold for less than $100, is now sold in auction houses for tens of thousands of dollars. Indigenous artists now command commissions in the tens of thousands of dollars. While there has been considerable positive change for Indigenous artists who today find markets that were unheard of 50 years ago, problems of ownership and authenticity are manifest. Renowned Canadian Aboriginal artist Norval Morrisseau sold some of his paintings on the street for literally pocket change. In 2014, his painting Figures in a Garden sold at auction for $50,874 US. Norval's story is not unique. Many Aboriginal artists struggle in poverty as resellers, forgers, and imposters get rich. A trial in Ontario recently revealed an alleged wellspring of hundreds of fake paintings purported to be the work of the famed Anishinaabe artist and is threatening Norval Morrisseau's legacy. Noted Indigenous artist Simon Brockapay asked me to bring this message to the committee. The Copyright Act does not cover cultural rights, the intellectual property rights associated with a cultural group. In this case, Indigenous peoples' cultural property held in common, such as distinctive art, design, dance, and so on, practiced today or in the past. Indigenous peoples may have laws which are practiced within a group that may include passing on of intellectual property orally from one generation to another, or from one individual to another. Cultural rights are recognized by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and should be recognized under copyright law. Article 1 subsection 1, Article 11, subsection 1 reads, Indigenous peoples have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. This includes the right to maintain, protect, and develop the past, present, and future manifestations of their cultures, such as archaeological and historic sites, artifacts, designs, ceremonies, technologies, and visual and performing arts and literature. Subset 2, states shall provide redress through effective mechanisms which may include restitution, developed in conjunction with Indigenous peoples, with respect to their cultural, intellectual, religious, and spiritual property taken without their free, prior, and informed consent. Canada is a signatory to the United Nations Declaration, and the Prime Minister has pledged to implement its provisions with Canadian law. As an act of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, the Copyright Act must be amended accordingly. Master carver Derek Manick Edenshaw asked me to bring this message concerning fraudulent Indigenous art to your attention. Quotes, I come from a family of artists of many mediums. A lot of my cousins, like myself, were fed by Native art growing up. Each village on Haida Gwaii depends on the economic benefits of a thriving Native art market. People see the success of Northwest Coast masters and assume that making Native art makes us all rich. That's quite simply untrue. There is an automatic industry standard 100% markup on Native art. After the overhead costs of tools, materials, and workshop space, West Coast artists get a very small hourly wage if you broke it down. There has always been knockoffs and fake First Nations art, and why shouldn't there be? It's the best. We have been continuously investigating various methods people use to create and get their fake art to market. These fraudulent pieces are directly taking food out of the mouth of First Nations families that have limited options beyond resource extracting jobs, which tear at the core of what makes us Indigenous. End quote. Finally, there is the issue that Canada has yet to amend the Copyright Act to provide for an artist resale right. Others, including Carfax and Access Copyright, have appeared before this committee and have made excellent presentations about this matter. However, I would respectfully like to suggest that the recommendation that the artist resale right be limited to sales through public auction or through galleries would have a serious negative impact on Indigenous artists. Most depend on direct sales rather than sale by auction or through galleries. Recently, I've been working with G52, a private company, and a small ad hoc Indigenous artist collective to pursue development of an Indigenous art registry using blockchain technology. Our goal is a platform that will safely and securely allow Indigenous artists to authenticate their work in a user-friendly online environment that foments artist collaboration, display, sale, and purchase of art. Indigenous artists would govern the database. This project is bringing Indigenous artists, curators, and academics together for a formative meeting in Toronto next month. It is our intention to undertake consultation with artists and members of the Indigenous community to create a registry and user platform that will address many of the issues raised before the Standing Committee. We believe such an Indigenous art registry could assist in tracking the sale and resale of Indigenous art and therefore make possible the extension of artist resale right to those artists through this new technological process. In any amendment to the Copyright Act to provide for an artist resale right, we urge this committee to recommend that the process through which the artist resale right would apply be worded in such a way as to allow that right to be open to the form of direct sale. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee, and we embrace the opportunities to work with all of you in the Government of Canada in ensuring the rights and protections of Indigenous artists and their work that are so clearly an indelible part of our history, culture, and our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we're going to move to Indigenous Culture and Media Innovations. Monique Manach.
Sorry. No questions?
Oh, no, we're going to do all the presentations first.
Oh, okay.
Then we'll go into the questions.
What about Johnny?
Yeah.
Are they together?
No, well, you can do it right now.
All right, fine. We'll go to Mr. Black. All right, we'll give you some time.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Mr. Blackfield. You have 7 minutes from a certified blockchain professional.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just want to confirm that you can hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. My name is Johnny Blackfield. I'm appearing here today as a certified blockchain professional. My goal is to reiterate what Mr. Belcourt just mentioned about using blockchain for Indigenous art registry. My goal today is to tell you a little bit about blockchain and then tell you how it's effective in creating an Indigenous art registry. So if we move to the second slide, titled What is Blockchain? I want to start with telling you what a distributed ledger is. A ledger forms the foundation of accounting, a system to store accounting information and transaction information. A distributed ledger is a database that can be shared across a multiple sites, geographies, or institutions, where all the users within the system can have access to the ledger either via a copy or connecting directly to the larger database. Any changes made on any one of the ledgers will be reflected on all the ledgers that currently exist. Blockchain is fundamentally an online digital ledger system to record transactions and events. It's built on a distributed network of nodes, all interacting with each other and holding an exact copy of the ledger. In its purest form, it is also a decentralized network of nodes that verify every transaction recorded in the ledger. No central authority is required to authenticate or validate transactions. The essential properties of blockchain that make it so useful include immutable or irreversible. Once transactions are recorded in the blockchain, they are cryptographically sealed and made irreversible. This prevents double spending, fraud, abuse, or manipulation of transactions, which plagues most databases. The second property is it requires no intermediaries. Blockchain technology, through the use of cryptographic proof, allows two parties to transact directly with each other without the need for a trusted third party. And finally, it is transparent. In a public blockchain, every transaction on the blockchain is recorded and is available for anyone to review. For example, for the most common blockchain available today, Bitcoin, you can trace back every Bitcoin transaction back to the creation of that coin. Next slide, please. The key technological attributes of a public blockchain include distributed peer-to-peer ledger. As I mentioned, it's a database with multiple relay points or nodes that all contain an exact copy of the transaction ledger. A node is essentially a computer, a server, or a group of computers that form a single relay point in a blockchain network. Each node talks to every other node in a peer-to-peer fashion. Each node processes and verifies transactions in a blockchain. A block. All the transactions that occur in a blockchain are recorded in a block of a certain size. In Bitcoin, that block size is 1 megabyte. Bitcoin Cash, it's 8 megabytes. A block is essentially just a bunch of transactions coming together. Once a block has been processed, it is permanently connected to the previous block using cryptography. Many blocks together form a chain of blocks or blockchain. The fourth property is a consensus mechanism. Since blockchains are decentralized with no leader or central authority, to make decisions, the nodes need a dynamic way of reaching agreement in a group known as consensus mechanisms. A consensus makes sure that an agreement is reached within the nodes, which could benefit the entire group as a whole. So moving on to the next slide. There are essentially two types of blockchains. Public blockchains rule the cryptocurrency world. Enterprise block focuses on permissioned blockchains. In a public blockchains, they are fully decentralized, fully transparent. The blockchains are secured by economic incentives and cryptographic verification. There is no reversal of transactions. Confirmations are slow. There's limited privacy protections, but the cost of transactions are low. And as I mentioned, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all of these cryptocurrencies are public blockchains. A permissioned blockchain, which is the one we would recommend for an artist registry, is a quasi-decentralized hybrid approach to a blockchain. The consensus process is controlled by a pre-selected set of nodes. Read permission of the blockchain restricted to participants. Options for the public to do limited queries. The participants can agree to rule changes, transaction reversals, and modification. Near-time confirmation of transactions are possible. A greater degree of privacy protections are allowed, and transaction costs are agreed to by the consortium. So it is also called a consortium approach to blockchains. Moving on to the next slide. So I've told you a little bit of what blockchain is, and let's talk about the primary uses of blockchain technology. Number one, transfer of value. Blockchain allows for secure, low-cost, near real-time transfer of value between two parties without the need for a trusted third-party intermediary. It forms the infrastructure to power functional digital currencies or cryptocurrencies. The second use is record keeping. Although not the best mechanism to store large volumes of data, blockchain, through its distributed and decentralized ledger technology, offers a highly reliable, secure, and low-cost mechanism for record keeping. Records in a public blockchain are immutable and secured through cryptography. Popular applications of blockchain for record keeping include digital identity, credential management, tokenization of financial securities, audit trails for supply chain logistics, financial transactions, and government compliance. And the third use is that of smart contracts. Smart contracts are digital contracts created by computer code and programmed to trigger a transfer of value and information under certain conditions, as in a sale of artwork would be controlled by smart contracts. Popular applications include automated governance and regulatory compliance, trade settlements, clearing, etc. Moving on to the next one. So blockchain has been making the news lately in several use cases. I've picked a few that were really interesting and relevant. Most of us have sent an international wire transfer using SWIFT. Right now, SWIFT would take anywhere from 1 to 3 days to complete a transfer. SWIFT, in fact, has started experimenting with blockchain technology and has been able to do transfers in as little as 2 hours as opposed to 3 days. Walmart, in fact, has created a blockchain along with certain Chinese retailers to help monitor food safety and food supply chains in countries like China, where you don't have as much transparency. One that's of particular interest is Reebok, because one of the challenges Reebok as a shoe company has had is the number of counterfeit shoes that are coming to the market. So what Reebok has done is it has formed an alliance with one of the major stores called Major, essentially putting brand new shoes created by Reebok, giving each of them a unique identifier and burning them onto a blockchain so that any shoe that is not listed there would be known to be counterfeit, whereas any shoe that's listed there would be authentic. And finally, a homegrown example, IBM will now be implementing a blockchain solution to track marijuana supplies as they move up the supply chain from farm to distributor to retailer to consumers in British Columbia. So they're creating a system to put the entire supply chain on blockchain, so there's incredible transparency, and they know where each party comes in and out of the system and to distribute payments to everyone down the supply chain. Moving on to the next slide.
Sorry to cut you off, Mr. Blackfield. We are running a little bit over. If you can try to just wrap that up.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure, I'll do that quickly. So now that we've done what blockchain is, some of its use to empower artists, Jacqueline O'Neill, Executive Director of Blockchain Art Collective, pretty much says that resale rights don't exist in North America for artists. Specifically, as Mr. Belcourt mentioned, artists whose paintings sell for thousands more than they initially sold for get nothing, whereas blockchain technology will allow them to get a piece. Specifically, the benefits of blockchain technology in an indigenous art registry include tracking physical or digital art sales. Digital art sales, you can do it through signatures, digital signatures. Physical art sales, there's technology called CryptoSeal, which allow you to create a digital fingerprint for physical art and allow you to track sales, secondary sales. art authentication and provenance. Blockchain will allow every indigenous artist to register their art on the blockchain, and they will have a claim to that art for eternity, really. And improved resale rights. Using a blockchain art registry and doing sales through that, the system can automatically take a percentage of the sale, every secondary sale, and store it for the artist as a royalty fee. Moving on to the next slide. And in conclusion, there are many benefits to blockchain, specifically, as mentioned here, simplified transactions, immutable data, increased transparency, increased trust. However, there are also some concerns with using blockchain, specifically on scalability issues or lack of blockchain literacy, user interfaces. All of these are still evolving. So my conclusion is, although there's tremendous potential to empower artists, through blockchain technology, there are also certain technological and commercial challenges that are being worked on right now, and I believe the future is really looking bright for this technology for indigenous art. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. And I was remiss in making a connection between Mr. Belcourt and Mr. Blackfield. They're actually working together to create a indigenous art registry and using blockchain as a potential solution. So I just wanted to make that connection for you. Thank you very much. We're going to move to Luann Neal. Are you with us?
I am.
Yay! Can I ask you, how do you pronounce your nation's name?
Kwakwakiwak.
Excellent. You have 7 minutes. Thank you.
Gila kastalkla, ikat wagatlin, gayutlin la chamama lilakla tlua kwagil, la umkla and gila kastlakhat la kwangan, la ehilgala gachans, chans gache la hoch awitna sas. So I've introduced myself, Luann Neal. One of the names that I carry is Ikat Wega, and I come from the Mama Lilakla and the Kwagil of the Kwakwakiwak, the Kwakwala speaking people, and I acknowledge the Lekwungen people for always making me feel so welcome in their ancestral lands. So I wanted to speak today mostly from the heart as an artist about some of the concerns that I've been hearing over the last 30 years in my volunteer work with artists all throughout the province of British Columbia. One of the main concerns that we have is the appropriation of our traditional art forms, that they have been appropriated across the world, and all of these appropriations are impacting directly our ability to participate in our own industry, our own market, and to have control over the things that come from our families and from our nations. Our traditional art forms are owned by our people. They are an inherited right that are passed down from one generation to the next. I come from an artist family and am now the 7th generation in my family to continue practicing our artistic traditions. These rights are inherited through our potlatch system, and they have very strict rules concerning them. Who gets to create, the levels and degrees at which people train and become apprenticed and then become mentors themselves. Some of the concerns that I hear are around the lack of support for Indigenous artists across Canada, but in BC particularly, where we used to have a provincial arts organization called the BC Indian Arts and Crafts Society. That society folded in 1986, so we've been 30 plus years without any kind of organizational support for our artists. This is very concerning because it means that there is no regulatory body or advocacy body watching out for the very things that my colleagues have talked about with this Indigenous Arts Registry. Some of the practical solutions that artists have asked me to share today are around having a really thorough analysis of how the Copyright Act, the Copyright Office, Canadian Heritage, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Section 35 of the Constitution, the Royal Commission, the TRC, and in BC, the Status of the Artist Act. An analysis of how all of these things fit together and work together and create solutions, can create solutions to address some of the concerns we have. Our artists continue to operate daily at under poverty levels. One of the studies that was done back in 2012 here in BC by the Indigenous Tourism Association found that in Vancouver alone, the tourist industry sold artworks, or rather copies of our artworks, and some of them are blatant copies and rip-offs, that 88% of that Indigenous themed market has nothing to do with our people, any of our people. We do not see the proceeds coming back to our communities. We don't see royalties. And in the first place, permissions have not been granted for the use of many of our designs. What we want to do is propose a national Indigenous arts service and advocacy organization, and that each of the provinces would follow suit and support this provincially through their respective arts, culture, and language organizations. Our arts are intertwined with our language, our social, political, economic, cultural, legal, intellectual, and governance structures. I want to point out that on the coast, some of the most popular art forms that are sold out there in the world today carry symbols and shapes that only come from this part of the world. If you look in the ancient history of art all around the world, you will not find the design that we call the ovoid. You will not find a split U. You will not find many of the shapes that comprise our traditional art forms. They were invented here, they were created by our people, and they continue to be maintained by our people. And we want to continue protecting our art for future generations. That's our role, responsibility, and obligation as artists. And so I want to propose to the committee, I'm not sure the extent or the scope of your influence on this, but I hope that you'll carry this message to your colleagues in other departments that oversee these kinds of things. That we want to have this national arts organization to work closely with CARFAC and CARC. We have good relationships with these two organizations, and we'd like to continue pursuing that. We'd like to have a national organization that will educate the public. People take our art because they don't know any different, and they don't know any different because we're not actively and proactively informing Canadian citizens about whether it's appropriate to take designs. We also want to see a great deal more consultation with our artists in respect of the Copyright Act. Currently, the Act does not specifically address communally owned property, familial owned property, and properties held by the nation. So we want to elaborate on these things, but we feel that there's a coordinated approach very much necessary. And so I ask the committee to consider making these kinds of recommendations to your colleagues and involving more artists across the country to have a voice in these discussions and create solutions that are going to enable us to take back our proper roles and responsibilities with respect to our art and continue the tradition into the future. Qeila Kasla. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, finally, we're going to go to Monique Menach. You have up to 7 minutes.
Kachimigwe. Pajashig, welcome. Welcome to our unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. Monique Menach Indigenous. My name is Monique Menach. I'm a member of the Algonquins of Barrier Lake and the Executive Director of Indigenous Culture and Media Innovations. Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee, I would like to begin by stating that Canada needs to create a fair and balanced intellectual property system that works for everyone, including Indigenous peoples in Canada. Over a millennia, Indigenous peoples and their knowledge systems have developed a wealth of traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions, which they rightly wish to protect and promote using their constitutional rights as well as the intellectual property system. In the Constitution Act 1982, the inclusion of the rights of Aboriginal people in Canada was included in Section 35. The existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of Aboriginal people of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed. Section 35(1) did not create rights, but rather provided for the constitutional recognition and affirmation of inherent rights created by Aboriginal law. Under 35(2), Aboriginal peoples of Canada includes the Indian, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms also contains a key provision protecting Aboriginal and treaty rights. Neither the oral nor the written promise in the reconciled treaties indicates that the nations or tribes delegate or transfer any jurisdiction to the Queen, Canada, or the provinces with respect to their traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions. The courts have affirmed that according to the terms of most treaties, the British sovereign did not give Indian rights. The Indigenous nations gave the British sovereign specific rights or responsibilities in their territory. This statement gives notice to the inconsistency between the Federal Copyright Act and the constitutional rights of Aboriginal peoples. The Copyright Act should be amended to be consistent with the constitutional rights of Aboriginal peoples. As a first step, the Act should be amended to provide and promote the traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions of Aboriginal peoples with a non-derogation clause. A non-derogation clause is needed for the protection and promotion of traditional knowledge and cultural expressions. Traditional arts may embody both traditional knowledge, the method of making, and traditional cultural expressions, their external appearance. Many forms of ceremonies, powwow, designs, and totems of this heritage reside in the traditional custodians of the stories or images. They include oral traditions, literatures, designs, sports, and games, visual and performing arts, dances, and songs. These manifestations carry not only the sacred knowledge, but also the law of Aboriginal peoples. The purpose of this non-derogation clause is to clarify that Aboriginal knowledge and cultural expressions are protected and promoted under Section 52(1) and 35 of the Constitution Act 1982 and Section 25 of the Charter. In Indigenous communities, it is usually a group or society rather than an individual who holds the knowledge or expressions. These groups monitor or control the use of these expressions to pass on important knowledge, cultural values, and belief systems to later generations. The groups have authority to determine whether the knowledges, expressions, stories, and images may be used, who may create them, and the terms of reproduction. Before the copyright law was developed in the Canadian common law and statutory law, the various confederations, nations, tribes, clans, and societies created, preserved, and nourished these knowledges and expressions. At the minimum, the Copyright Act should be amended to contain a non-derogation clause to protect the traditional knowledge and cultural expressions of the Aboriginal peoples or to prevent their misappropriation by others. Such a clause is necessary to prevent an Aboriginal people's traditional knowledge and cultural expressions from being used without their authorization and to ensure that the people in question have the opportunity to share in the benefits of such use. Canadian common law has not defined traditional knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, traditional cultural expressions, or Indigenous knowledge. In the filters of the contemporary Eurocentric thought, traditional knowledge is formulated to mean the know-how, skills, innovations, and practices developed by Aboriginal peoples, while traditional cultural expressions are interpreted as the tangible and intangible expressions of traditional knowledge and cultures. The intellectual property system in Canada does not protect or promote these constitutional rights, nor offer any solution. It is time for federal law to be made consistent with Aboriginal and treaty rights of Aboriginal people. Canada has endorsed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007, including Article 13, which states Indigenous people also have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their intellectual property over such cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions. Canada should begin consultations with the Aboriginal peoples about how they want to protect and promote their traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions. They may choose to protect them by Aboriginal law or by cooperating in the establishment of protective legislation that gives intellectual property-style protection to traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions. Thank you. Gachimigwich for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you very much. Before we get going, I just want to so what'll happen is we're going to go till just before 5, and then Mr. Albus will be asking to debate a motion. So then we'll break up at then. We'll finish our questions, and we'll save up some time for that as well. I appreciate the collegiality as this, and we get to spend time with our witnesses. So we're going to start off with Mr. Sheehan. You have 7 minutes.
And Chief English to all our presenters, thank you very much. It was very informative, and I'm from a riding up in northern Ontario called Sault Ste. Marie, and Sault Ste. Marie is proud to say is a traditional meeting ground for the First Nations and the Métis people. They were coming to Sault Ste. Marie thousands of years before Canada came to being, and they came for the whitefish because of the river. And First Nations came from all over to fish there, and so then it became a sort of a sacred area because they wouldn't do war because they were fishing and providing for their families. And while they were set up there, they started doing powwows and sharing stories and arts and culture and doing commerce. So it was very, very interesting. And on that site, later on, there was a residential school where Algoma University is now. And they have recently applied for and received funding, and they're building an Anishinaabe Discovery Center, which is, and I know the parliamentary secretary was there recently, which is going to house a chief's library, which will have knowledge and artifacts. And at the recent meeting, I was talking to Chief Belgrade, and he said that they had passed a resolution from Chief Sayers in the area where they're going to house some of that. So I'm very pleased to see that there's a lot of things going on from coast to coast to coast as it relates to arts, culture, knowledge as we move towards truth and reconciliation. So I'm really interested, Tony, in if you could expand and talk about how the blockchain technology can be used to preserve and promote Indigenous works, and the details on the creation of the registry using blockchain with your associate Johnny Blackfield. So if you want to expand on that. I know we ran out a little time with the presentation there, so if either one of you would like to address that or both.
Thank you. Sault Ste. Marie, the home of Stephen Rowdy Powley,
Very good,
famous case that went to the Supreme Court of Canada.
Very good friends of mine.
To establish unequivocally that the Métis right to hunt and fish for food was an existing constitutional right. We're at the formative stages of our discussion on this. We've been into, there are about 50 people across Canada that have been going back and forth and discussing this. And that includes people from Canadian Heritage, Canada Council for the Arts, the various galleries, and Indigenous artists, curators. There's 100% interest and desire that we have something like this, that we've just outlined. It's basically an organization such as the one Luann Hills Neal says we need to have. That would, we need an organization, obviously. We don't have one. That would make the decisions on who, what art gets to be included in the registry, and there are some very touchy issues, obviously, on Indigenous identity, but that's part of the whole discussion. We have to have that. And so who decides? Obviously, it's got to be the Indigenous people that decide, nobody else. The Indigenous Art Registry itself, where our discussions are about that being a separate entity that is owned partly by the Indigenous organization and partly by private company that would be sourcing financing and so on, and managing the technical aspects of the registry, but overseeing what is registered and by whom is the decision of the Indigenous peoples. And as Luann was mentioning, a national organization that would be involved in the development of a registry would also obviously want to be doing many more things. For example, formally coming to a committee like this, representing its members, advocating on behalf of its members for changes to legislation, doing the work of, as Luann has said, education and promotion of our art, our customs, our cultures, traditions, and values, so that people have a better understanding of that. So I hope I've
Very good.
given an explanation.
That was really good. And so I guess my next question will be to Luann and Neil, and perhaps Monique, you can also take a shot at that too. While we were traveling throughout Canada, we were asking the question about how we can do a better job with copyright with First Nation, Métis people. And one of the things that was brought to our attention was that asking permission is important. But then when we delved into it, we found out that a lot of times the piece in question isn't owned by an individual. It's owned by a clan, if you will, or the First Nation itself. So perhaps, and I think, Luann, you started alluding to that. If you could explain that to us a little better, and how might, if we made changes to the Copyright Act, how would you incorporate some of that into that?
Absolutely. I think that one of the advantages we have at this moment in time is all of the work that's been going on around the revitalization of Indigenous languages. As I mentioned, everything's really intertwined: social, political, economic, cultural, governance, legal, and that includes our art. And when we talk about art, of course, being all of the disciplines, from song, dance, music, theater, and visual arts, of course. I think that that we're lucky that we have the work going on around language, because it actually serves as a really strong starting point for us to connect or reconnect our arts disciplines and our practices in with the work that's going on with language. The two are the same. So I think we already have some initial infrastructure there. I think there's a definite a process of learning that we can do in terms of what our language communities have done to establish and reestablish themselves, but also many of the words that are used to describe our art and in fact tell the ancient stories that we're telling are in the language. So I think there's some partnership abilities there, but we also have many instances over the past 30 years of local and regional arts organizations having started up. But because of that larger umbrella support that we really need to keep these things going long term, many of those local organizations lasted 2 or 3 or 5 years. So I think it's making that long-term commitment. It's making the departments responsible, giving them the ability to engage in these discussions with us, and then calling on our brothers and sisters who are doing the good work in language.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Mr. Albus. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for your testimony and coming today to speak about issues you all feel very passionate about and helping with us with our work. I'd like to ask specifically first, Luann Neil, we've had in the Canadian Ballet Association, or Dance Association, I'm not sure which one, and they talked about an area that's quite important to me, that individual artists should be able to copyright choreographed movements in sequences. Now, I used to be a martial arts instructor, and I do share concerns that movements that have been passed on for generations, to have individual ownership of those choreographed movements may be an issue. Do you feel that when someone does a choreographed dance, say based on traditional ways and knowledge, that they should be able to own copyright on that choreography, or do you think that is something that we should not permit as copyrighted material?
Good question. I think that one of the approaches that I've recommended when I was working at the Banff Centre for the Aboriginal Arts Program, we actually did a pilot project. This was back in 2003 and 4, where we brought together traditional dancers to show us the actual movements they use so that our modern Aboriginal choreographers could learn from that and be truly inspired, not copying the movements, but be inspired by the movements and understand what they were. And I think the question is really not so much about should we be able to, under Canadian copyright law, allow that kind of designation, but under our traditional laws. And under our traditional laws, those dance movements stay within their ceremonies and only there because they're connected to something much larger, much greater around our spirituality, our history, and our culture. And I think what we need to focus on here in Canada, and I think there's some really beautiful, incredible opportunities to be inspired, for our young choreographers to be inspired and create new movements that are based on the old ones, but not exact copies of them. I think we're missing an opportunity. I think that reaching into our traditions and trying to bring them forward in that way whittles away at the sacredness and the specialness of those movements in ceremony. They're also part of our belief systems around when you make those movements along with the song, along with the entire atmosphere of ceremony, you're sending vibrations out that, you know, lots of us really strongly believe in that. And that's an energy and that's a force that we need to protect. So I think that it's more about having more discussions about what is appropriate, what's inappropriate, and that's a discussion, as my colleague mentioned a few minutes ago, that has to take place amongst our people.
So in my area of the Okanagan, obviously there's a real desire to maintain culture. For example, the Outma School in Penticton, on Penticton Indian Band, they've worked very hard to build traditional knowledge as part of their public curriculum. And the one thing I wonder in all of this is that if a teacher decides to codify certain practices in a certain way. So for example, textbooks outlining language or outlining rituals in the attempt to organize it, how would then that copyright, because again, if he or she wants to take it to a Canadian publisher, the Canadian publisher is going to want to know who owns the content, so that when they publish it, if there's fair dealings issues or whatnot, what I think what I'm getting at in regards to this is when someone takes the time to structure that traditional knowledge and language or culture in a specific way for teaching purposes, do they own the copyright for that in order for them to help facilitate their nation, their communities, to be able to share that culture, that traditional knowledge?
Well, I know that here in BC, we've had lots of discussions around that, and again, that falls under the example that's being set by our language revitalization communities, and there's still no upper-level legislative protection that covers everybody the same way, because the languages are so different and the community's approaches are different. Everyone's at different stages of doing this kind of work. Many of the communities who have been at it for a while have talked more along the lines of ensuring that any curriculum or any of these kinds of materials that are being developed with the language rest with the nation. And by nation, I mean the language nation, not necessarily the Indian Affairs band structure, because that's an administrative structure, but the traditional knowledge keepers and intellectual property holders of that knowledge work together in teams with their language specialists so that it remains with the tribe. But we do still need some recognition of those entities at the upper levels, and especially at legislative levels. And here with the Copyright Act, I think this is a place to start. And I think that it can duplicate itself across other pieces of legislation.
Now, at that same school, there are non-Indigenous teachers that do teach and have created good relationships in the community, the trust of the children, and have put together specific processes. So I just wonder if someone was, again, to put some of that traditional knowledge into a different format, like a textbook or an audio material or a website, would that person be able to then have copyright to be able to have those works produced in a larger format? I'm just worried that if we don't have certain rules of how we navigate these areas, that we won't see the propagation of culture and especially in new innovation. Particularly when there's a gentleman who's tweeting a Inuk word a day. And again, there's a teacher that's taken that content with his permission and formalizing it into school. So, that's an innovation. He may choose at some point to codify it in a book. And so that's where I think many of these things have to be answered. But I appreciate your submission today. I'd like to go quickly, if I could, just on the artist resale. First of all, if someone is Indigenous, and again, we also have to, not all First Nations, there's also, INDU, Inuit, Métis. So would all those be able to be participating in this registry? And what if someone does not identify their works specifically as Indigenous, but they are of an Indigenous origin? So how does that work with the registry?
The people that are involved in our discussions are First Nations and Métis. The Inuit have the Inuit Art Foundation, and they have the tag system. We're talking about wanting to be able to obviously collaborate and work together, but the people involved at this point are First Nations and Métis people.
And if someone creates art that they would not classify themselves as Indigenous, and again, let's say it is a classical oil painting that doesn't have that, would that qualify under this because they're of an Indigenous origin, or would it only apply to a certain criteria of specified by the registry's criteria?
That's up for discussion. Our focus is to bring Indigenous artists together, and that their art is what will be registered. And so we haven't put limits on it at this point. You've raised a really good question. I hadn't even thought about it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Mr. Massey. You have your 7 minutes.
Yeah, thank you to the witnesses for being here and those that are on different locations. With regards to the Copyright Act, is there things that can be done right now without a legislative review that you'd suggest as a priority? My concern is the committee here will turn around a decision to the minister in terms of a report. The minister will get back to us, and then there'll have to be legislative changes in the future. If there's going to be changes to the act, that will probably require it then going through Parliament again. Well, will require it, and then to the Senate eventually, and so forth. And we're probably not going to see much happen through legislative measures for the next year and a half with an election looming. So with that in mind, and maybe I'll start with here in Ottawa and then turn to our guests that are by video conference, are kind of prioritize of things that maybe perhaps out of the legislative framework you would like to see perhaps prioritized to get some immediate results, if there are things, or is this a larger problem?
What comes to mind immediately is the fact that the copyright law is based on the individual.
Yep.
And our knowledge and culture is based with our communities. It's community-oriented. And, for example, there are images that are used on the teepees out west where the families own those images. And only certain members of the family are given the responsibility of and the ability to put those images on those particular teepees. So when someone comes along and takes a picture of those images and then turns around and sells T-shirts and claims copyright because they have the images, and if you change the form of the knowledge, that does not constitute ownership of the knowledge. So regardless of what form the knowledge takes, whether it goes to a website or whether it becomes a book, the knowledge itself is still owned by the community.
Okay.
And I think that's a starting point. For
Okay.
me, anyway, that's
good advice.
We've been in discussions with officials at, well, as I mentioned before, the Canada Council for the Arts and also Canadian Heritage. They're interested in what it is that we're doing, because at Canadian Heritage, in fact, they were planning to do some of their research their own. What we'd like to do, and if this committee could support us, is to have this work on a possible regulation and so on that could be developed, that it be done in conjunction with the Indigenous arts community and support our full participation and inclusion in that work. My purpose coming here today, and I'm not speaking on behalf of an organization, I can't. I speak for myself. But I know the sentiments of what our people are talking about. The Copyright Act is before you now. There are going to be amendments to the Copyright Act, and if you're going to include an amendment for an artist resale right, I just wanted to say, leave it open enough so that it won't be just limited to sale of art through auction or through galleries, to enable this new technology to come into play and to be used as well, so that there can be direct sale between artists and sellers, and that the resale right would apply in that circumstances as well.
Great, thank you. Perhaps over to our video. Okay, yes, Mr. Blackfield, is it?
So what I would say from a technology standpoint, absolutely, we can start to build the technology for Indigenous art registry right now, because there are certain other factors beyond legislation how such a registry could help. One of the key attributes of such a registry would be provenance, or essentially figuring out who exactly the artist is. So once an Indigenous artist registers their art and it's authenticated on a blockchain, it's their claim for eternity. It's immutable. So as far as I know, we don't need any legislation to implement that. The legislation would be on enforcing the resale right, or whatever percentage we assign to that. But I say right now we can build the technology. It'll still take anywhere from a minimum of 6 months to 18 months to build this effectively, and we can build it and then enforce the legislation, whatever it turns out to be at a later point.
All right, thank you. And Mrs. Quaggoth?
Mrs. Who?
Pronunciation, Mrs. Quagwilth? Is it? I'm just mispronouncing your name. Neil. Oh, Neil.
Oh.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm Miss Coggill now. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm surprised I can even get the pronunciation of Neil correct. That's a big step for me. So.
Well, congratulations on Coggill. You did great on that. Yeah, I think that we've been waiting a really long time for some steps to move forward, and I think that one of my most immediate priorities is, as I mentioned, the formation of a national Indigenous arts service and advocacy organization We need some sort of a system that where, as my colleagues mentioned, that we can address committees such as this, but also respond to the different departments that have responsibility and mandates to address things that affect our artists. I think that it's all about rebuilding the structures within our communities so that we can respond to these things. Many of the systems we had in place traditionally that were really clear about who got to be an artist, how they got trained, what they did with their art, what art forms they were allowed to practice. All of that structure came apart with all of the things we've heard about, residential schools, the Indian Act, and I think that it's about redress and it's about rebuilding. So I think that this is something we can do at an administrative and operational level without changes to legislation, but in the long term, I still would like to see amendments to the Act and consider further into the future either addendums to the Act or exemptions from it.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Mr. Graham. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you. One of the great frustrations I have in my life is that my great-grandfather, Alphonse Perret, spoke English, French, Cree, and Ojibwe, and he didn't pass that knowledge on to the next generations. That frustrates me greatly. So for me to hear that the vast majority of so-called Indigenous art isn't legitimate, Ms. Neal, that frustrates me. You know, I didn't know that. So I guess nothing quite so horrifying as buying Indigenous art and then finding a Made in China label on the back of it. So, so how can I, as a consumer and people generally, recognize the fraudulent or the counterfeit Indigenous art, and what can we do about it from that side of things as well?
Well, we actually had an initiative here in BC that began to address that through the Indigenous Tourism Association, where we did an authenticity labeling system. It was a pilot. We did this in 2014 and 15, but of course it required funding support. We did not have the funding support to continue it, but by and large, the shops, the galleries, the producers that we talked with, and the artists were very much in favor of this as a starting point, as something we could do. And I could really see the synergies between that particular system and the system that Mr. Belcourt and his colleagues have proposed. So I think that there's that to take care of. But again, it's about public education. It's about relationships. I think that, you know, as Canadian citizens, we all need to realize that here we are in our country, and yet we're being treated differently. Other artists do not have the same challenges that we do. I always use Robert Bateman as an example. Would you take a Bateman painting, copy it, and expect not to hear from his lawyer? So we need that kind of support. We need organizational support, and we need the ability amongst our nations to rebuild the kinds of structures we had that protected these ancient traditions.
Thank you. I don't want to end there, but it's really interesting, but I do want to ask a few other questions of other people as well. So Mr. Blackfield, you had mentioned problems of scalability with blockchain. And so artist resales, especially, is something that takes place over a infinitely long time frame. So therefore, blockchains would have to be infinitely scalable to work. So how scalable are blockchains?
That's a really good question, sir. Right now, public blockchains such as Bitcoin, Ethereum have all had scalability issues. They're the most secure blockchains out there right now because they've been tested over years, but they do have scalability issues. Some of the enterprise blockchains or permission blockchains such as Hyperledger and Corda and other platforms, they're actively working on these scalability issues. So for example, I know I run a startup myself and we build on Corda. We are trying to build a platform that can do millions of transactions every second because we're building a trading platform. So this is one of the biggest problems being worked on in the blockchain world. I don't believe anyone has a solid result yet, but the blockchain world is so young. I would say in the next 6 to 18 to 24 months, we're going to have some very scalable solutions. That being said, what I don't ever see a blockchain art registry having as many transactions as, say, a stock exchange on blockchain. So they're building platforms for stock exchanges, so that technology could very well be used for art registries. So although it is a problem today, it is not something I believe will be a huge sticking point in the future.
I've been in technology long enough to know that there's no system that lasts forever in technology. And so when something comes along that inevitably obsoletes blockchain, or we discover that it isn't actually secure after all, and there's some major vulnerability in the whole algorithmic process, how hard is it to get that cumulative historical data out of it and into the next system? If it's all cryptographically signed, how are we going to get that entire history back and salvage it?
That would really depend on what kind of blockchain you've designed in the first place. Again, blockchain is more of a methodology than a technology. It's being used in different ways, like I said, different platforms, which are the technology. They're still evolving. Right now, I don't see too many reasons why blockchain would fail completely long term. There are certain limitations. Blockchain is not a solution for everything, as a lot of people think it is. I believe a system that's well designed and planned and takes the time to get there, as opposed to rushing to market, will actually prove to be quite useful in blockchain. I completely appreciate your understanding technology and your history in it, and you're right, no system is fail-safe. No, there will be blockchains that will be hacked in the future for sure, especially now that we have quantum computing and other advances like that coming through. Right. But right now, it's the absolute best solution we have. There will be vulnerabilities in the future for sure, but people are working on that too. So I think that's the best answer I can give you right now.
Oh, I appreciate that. But in the same vein, in a totally decentralized environment, which is what you're talking about, being available as an option, someone has to hold the data somewhere, because if everyone says someone else is holding it, then sooner or later nobody's holding it, the data's gone. So how do you centralize a decentralized system?
So I'll give you an example how, and this is just an approach, it's not the exact solution. In an indigenous art registry, it's decentralized in that it doesn't have one owner, but it could have dozens of owners. Every nation, every tribe could have an ownership stake, and they would each, I'm going to spitball here, but they would each have or put in a certain amount of money to put up the network. And then all of the tribes together would elect an administrative council that would actually administer the blockchain. So that is one approach, and that in fact is how Bitcoin works. Bitcoin has got over 9,000 nodes, servers, and they've elected a Bitcoin foundation that runs it, and there's a core team that actually implements all the changes and administers the network. So that is one proposed approach of how you could take a decentralized model and still make it functional.
And you mentioned Bitcoin. That's an interesting point. We know Bitcoin is pretty popular now for fraud and for theft on the internet and so forth. Now, we'll lock up your computer, give us a Bitcoin, or you won't unlock it. So using blockchain, is this something that's going to help or hurt the fight against art crime and forgeries? And how would it affect the privacy of the buyers, given these records are floating around everywhere?
That's a great question. Bitcoin, as I mentioned in my presentation, is a public blockchain. So one of the advantages of Bitcoin is its transparency. It's public. Any one of us could go and look at every block that's ever been created on Bitcoin, and you can see every transaction. You don't see the names of people transacted, but just their public addresses. And really, there is very little or no privacy, so to speak. In a permissioned blockchain, you can add layers of privacy. You can create different levels of security and different admin rights. Some people don't like, the purists don't like permissioned blockchains because they don't call it a true blockchain. But for enterprise purposes, such as Indigenous Art Registry, you can actually create different permissions, different security levels to make it far more secure or far more private than public blockchains.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to Mr. Lloyd. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses today. Mr. Graham's kind of stole my question there with the end of his one, but it would be to Mr. Blackfield. Maybe could get you to elaborate more on if we are putting a blockchain on a physical good, how are we respecting the privacy rights of the buyer? And then secondly, just on a feasibility basis, Like, how is the money going to be collected? Like, are you going to send an invoice to the new purchaser and say, pay up? You know, you just bought this artwork. How would that work in practice?
It's a great question. So there are a couple of parts there. I'm going to address the first part regarding the privacy of the buyer. There is a new concept called zero knowledge proof. It's pretty mathematical, so I won't get into details. Essentially, what it allows someone to verify that the buyer or the seller actually has the product and has sold it to the buyer without actually revealing any of the details of the buyer. So there is a way to actually have these transactions done in privacy. It's one of the innovations in blockchain, which is really revolutionizing the way things are done. It's very, very new. There are very few actual implementations in production right now, but zero knowledge proof is exactly a way that you can do, and you can buy and sell art by protecting the identity of the buyer. To your second question as to how the payment would work, this is through something called a smart contract. A smart contract is essentially code that's written into the blockchain that'll transact without an intermediary coming in there. So what that means is anytime there's an actual sale from seller to a buyer, the smart contract would be triggered to take a percentage of the payment from the buyer and input it into a registry for resale rights for the artist.
I understand that, but how doesn't that base that on like the good faith of the buyers and the sellers to actually do this, to follow through with those payments?
So again, all this would depend on how the registry is used. These are some of the commercial questions still being asked and not fully answered. This system would work great if all of these sales are done online or through the registry.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure.
My next question for Miss Neal. This came up when we were in Winnipeg and we were speaking to some of the Indigenous witnesses, and it's sort of been alluded to in some of the questions here, but I wanted to see if I could get as specific of an answer as I could. If there's a case where you have traditional Indigenous knowledge and we're being asked to envision a system where we would recognize the right of the group, and you spoke of a language group rather than a formalized band structure. If there was an individual who was part of that language group and they wrote a book based on their experiences using the traditional knowledge and symbols, we recognize that person's individual right to copyright. But how, if we recognize a group right, how do you foresee that working out?
That's $1 million question. I think that this is the part where we haven't finished our discussions. It goes back to being able to restructure that communal entity, if you will, that allows for individuals within that entity to create their own works and still go out and copyright. For instance, in my family, I have rights to draw upon the legends and the crests from my particular family group. In this world, there's nothing to stop me other than my integrity and my obligation and my responsibility back to the nation. Those aren't codified rules, they're not written down anywhere, but that's part of the structure I'm proposing that we start to develop within our communities.
So, we want to make the best recommendations possible, and I think avoiding conflicts like a possible conflict between an individual who's a member of a nation who copyrights something and then recognizing the rights of the group, what recommendations would you have on how we can balance between those two sets of rights? Or is that something that's undetermined at this point?
It is slightly undetermined. I think my biggest recommendation right now is to support that localized work that needs to happen so that we have entities that we can draw upon that knowledge. In the meantime, all we have is the current law, but as I mentioned right at the beginning of my presentation, we have to also reconcile and do an analysis of how the UN Declaration, TRC, RCAT, all those things actually roll out at the practical level. So I don't think we've answered any of those questions and how those pieces of reports and recommendations overlap one another and in some areas leave gaps.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
For the folks in the room, you'll see the lights flashing. That's our bat signal to say we need to get ourselves out to the House because we got a vote coming up. So looking at the time, excuse me, looking at the time, it doesn't look like we'll be able to come back and finish. So we're going to just adjourn for the day. So I want to thank our witnesses for very interesting testimony. It's really good. We can't. So we are going to adjourn for the day. And I'm going to remind our witnesses that you can submit a brief. There's a lot of interesting information. So if there's things you haven't said, I recommend that you submit a brief. And because we are very interested in this. Thank you very much.